Hey everyone, welcome back. As of today, we have just 2 days until Classic WoW is finally here. Start your meal prepping, get everything done, take your time off work if you haven't already, which it might be a little bit too late if you haven't already. Anyways, I know you guys are super excited for Classic WoW. I'm super excited. We get to watch the race to world first as well. That's gonna be amazing. Anyways, let's get into the video. Today, we're going to be talking about the pre-raid best in slot for phase 1 and the raid best in slot for phase 1 Warlock. Not only that, but we're going to talk about some ways you can gear swap as well so that you can optimize for burst DPS and you can optimize for sustained DPS, and we'll explain a little bit about that as well. Let's get into the video, guys. Okay, before we get into these different best in slot sheets, it's important to notice that we're using Classic WoW's Classic Gear Planner tool. And in this tool, we'll be using certain pieces of gear that have of Shadow Wrath roll on them, which means they'll have plus shadow damage on a specific item up to a certain amount. But this Classic Gear Planner tool does not accumulate plus shadow damage, plus fire damage, or any plus damage of an elemental type. It only accumulates plus spell power. So the spell power you see on some of these charts may not be 100% accurate if we're wearing of Shadow Wrath, etc. type of gear. Okay, just one more thing before we actually get into the best in slot. That's something that I mentioned just a minute ago. In this guide, we're going to be going over burst gear and sustained DPS gear. Now, you might be asking, what does that mean? Okay, so there's situations in Classic WoW raiding where you're going to find an enemy that has a particular ability that goes off after a certain amount of time after engaging them. And if you equipped burst gear, gear with high amounts of crit, gear with on-use effects to increase the value of your critical strike rating, you can burst down these mobs before they get their particular ability off. An example of this is Ancient Corehound found in Molten Core. Ancient Corehound has an ability where after a certain amount of time after engaging them, they do a breath type ability, or they do some sort of raid-wide debuff mechanic. Typically, this is going to be a curse, and your raid's going to have to completely decurse themselves, taking a lot of time and a lot of mana, slowing down your raid. So what most people do is they'll equip burst gear to get this enemy killed before the ability goes off. There's another mob in Blackwing Lair, for example, called Blackwing Warlock. After engaging these enemies, a certain amount of time after fighting them, they'll summon a demon portal that will eventually summon a level 63 elite Felguard that not only does single target damage, but also does AoE damage. This is another example of when you want to really burst down an enemy. Also, if your guild has gotten geared up, you guys are organized, fully world buffed, and want to try a raid speedrun, there can also be speedruns in early raids such as Molten Core, where you can burst down a boss within 20 to 23 seconds, especially for early Molten Core bosses like Lucifron. This is also another situation where burst gear can be useful. As for sustained DPS, these items are typically DPS that are going to gain a lot of value over a period of time. Typically gear that has a lot of spell power on it. Gear where after you do your formula to calculate what is best in slot will yield you the most amount of damage on an average basis. If you have high spell power gear, you gain increased value from life tap, meaning life tap will give you more mana per use, allowing you to use less global cooldowns. Spell power also increases the value you gain from dots if your raid leader allows you to do corruption, and of course increases the damage of your Shadow Bolt. Okay, to start us off, we're going to start with the Phase 1 pre-raid best in slot list. And this list is going to include items with burst damage, such as Cap of the Scarlet Savant, the first item. This is a helmet that you can get off of a long quest chain starting with the Pristine Hide of the Beast and costs a lot of money. Pristine Hide of the Beast is a rare item to get off of the Beast in Upper Blackrock Spire. And once you do actually obtain this rare hide, you have to spend gold on other rare items to complete the quest chain. But once you actually get this item, it adds 2.3% crit chance, 2% on the actual tooltip, and 20 intellect. And if you don't know, Warlocks get 1% crit rating per 60 intellect, so it adds 1/3 of a crit chance just off that alone. This is a very, very, very good item for burst damage early on into the game. Second item is the neck piece, Star of Mysteria. Now, this item is just pre-raid bis simply because it has hit rating on it and is better than any other neck that we can get at that phase of the game. Now, the next item is Master's Mantle, but it doesn't have to be Master's Mantle. It can be a max rolled of Shadow Wrath green piece, and the max roll for shoulders is 30 damage. So the best in slot shoulder piece is just a plus 30 damage shoulder piece. The same can be said about the cloak. It doesn't have to be a Master's Cloak. Just has to be a high level cloak that has plus 21 shadow damage on it, or as close to 21 as you can get, seeing as the highest rolled pieces are going to cost the most money. Now, the next item is an item that I want to talk about for a little, and that is Robe of the Void. Now, technically, Robe of the Void is the best in slot chest piece for a Warlock. However, I would never ever recommend it, even for the people that want to min-max to the very most hardcore that they possibly can. And I'll tell you why. So, Robe of the Void has 46 spell power on it and no intellect. And to obtain this chest piece, the player has to have 300 tailoring, which means they have to level 1 to 300 tailoring, which is either going to cost them a lot of time gathering all the cloth, or a lot of gold buying all the cloth. And then once they've finally reached 300 tailoring, they have to go into Sholomance and kill the last boss. And the last boss has a really, really, really low drop chance to get this item. This means that you could get lucky and get it in the first 5 runs of the dungeon, or it could take you 30 or 40 runs of the dungeon just to get the pattern to drop. And then once you've finally gotten the pattern to drop, you have to go farm all the materials to make the item, which is going to cost you several hundred gold and time, seeing as you have to farm demonic runes. And this robe is only slightly better than a robe that you can just buy that's BOE, called Robe of the Winter Knight. Robe of the Winter Knight gives you 40 spell power, but has 12 intellect on it. This means that the difference between this robe and Robe of the Winter Knight is less than 1% DPS increase, and you're investing and you're investing a huge amount of time just to get this less than 1% DPS increase, when you could be investing that time and money elsewhere. And it is very important to note that in Phase 1, that is the most crucial time to be investing, setting up money, setting up your character, leveling alts, getting your character ready and your account ready for later phases, and so on. There are many, many better things that you could be doing with your time and money than farming for a robe that could take you 30, 40 runs with 30 to 40 minutes per run just to get a robe that's only tiny bit better for PvE. The next item is Master's Bracers. And just like the other Master's pieces, this is going to be an of Shadow Wrath piece, and the highest that Bracers can roll is plus 21. The next item is another item that is for burst damage, and this is Gloves of Spell Mastery. Gloves of Spell Mastery, like Cap of Scarlet Savant, has 2% crit on it, which is really nice for Warlock. Not only is crit rating just good overall because critical hits do extra damage, but it also is going to imply improved Shadow Bolt debuff, which adds damage for not only you, but all the other Shadow damage users in the raid, meaning the Shadow Priest if you're using one, and all the other Warlocks in the raid. So I personally prefer to stack crit early game to get as high uptime on improved Shadow Bolt as possible. The next item is Banthok Sash, which is a waist that you can farm off of BRD Arena. This item is another one of the few items that Warlocks can get in Phase 1 that actually has hit rating on it. So there's no other belt that can really compare with this belt. Next is Sky Shroud leggings, and these legs are going to take you a little bit of time to farm because not only do Warlocks want it, but all spellcaster DPS want it, and even sometimes healers. These legs are the best legs that you can get, and are farmed off of the first boss in Lower Blackrock Spire. Next are the boots, and just like the other items, you want of Shadow Wrath on boots, and the highest that it can roll for boots is plus 30 damage. Next are the rings, and the two rings that you really want are Songstone of Ironforge, or the Horde variant that you can get off of a BRD quest run, and a BOE called Maiden Circle. Maiden Circle can oftentimes go for quite a bit of gold, but it's going to be best in slot until you obtain a raid ring. Now, we're going to talk about the trinkets. The only two trinkets that casters really have access to in Phase 1 is Briarwood Reed and Eye of the Beast. So by default, these are going to be your best in slot trinkets. The weapons are going to be Inventor's Focal Sword for your main hand, and Drakestone of Shadow Wrath for your offhand. An Inventor's Focal Sword is also one of the pieces that is for burst DPS. There is an alternative item for this slot that we're going to go over in the next sheet. As for the Drakestone of Shadow Wrath, this is just simply the best offhand that you can get early game. And that's because offhands can roll up to 23 shadow damage, and you want this of Shadow Wrath for that 23 damage. Meaning that this offhand is going to give you 30 spell power just by itself. Now, let's talk about something that a lot of people are asking me about, and that is, Alive, what if Soul Harvester from Sunken Temple quest is going to be available in Phase 1? What if it's available in Phase 1? Isn't that pre-raid bis? I mean, it has hit rating on it. It's gotta be. Not necessarily. Soul Harvester does indeed have 1% hit rating on it, but it has no intellect and only has a little bit of spell power. And it isn't a bad item at all. However, if you have Drakestone of Shadow Wrath in either Inventor's Focal Sword or the next item we're going to talk about, it comes out slightly ahead of Soul Harvester. Just because Soul Harvester has hit rating on it doesn't automatically by default make it the best item that you can wear pre-raid. Lastly is just going to be the wand, and this wand is going to last you all the way up until Naxxramas. You are not going to get a better wand until Naxxramas. And that is Dragonfinger of Shadow Wrath. Again, it doesn't necessarily have to be Dragonfinger, but it has to be the highest level wand possible to get the highest roll possible of Shadow Wrath. And the rolls, depending on how Blizzard is going to do of Wrath gear, is either going to be 21 or 23, but most likely 21. Okay, next is going to be the Phase 1 pre-raid best in slot, just like the previous one, except it's going to include sustained DPS items instead of burst DPS items. So there's only going to be a few items that are actually different here. The first of them being Master's Hat. Just like always, it doesn't have to be Master's, but the highest roll of Shadow Wrath you can get for this item slot is plus 41. The next item that's different are the gloves. The gloves, instead of gloves of spell mastery that have crit rating on them, you can go for hands of power that are a little bit more difficult to farm. This is off a mob that is about halfway through Lower Blackrock Spire, making this item slightly difficult to farm, but pretty good. These gloves add 26 spell power, no stamina, but they add intellect and spirit, which is still useful. Next is Witchblade. Witchblade is pretty easy to farm, honestly, adding 14 spell power and 8 intellect, making it a pretty good sustained DPS item. The rest of the items, however, are the exact same. Okay, now we're going to go over the Phase 1 raid best in slot. And this is going to include items with burst DPS, because that is my preference on how I like to play. Burst damage is more beneficial the faster you kill things, however. So if I'm killing a boss such as Ragnaros, or maybe if you're in a slower guild or a more casual guild, I would recommend that you aim for the sustained DPS items, as they gain value over time, making your life taps better, and so on and so on. However, this is what I like to go for. So you can swap some of these items for the sustained DPS items that I mentioned earlier, depending on your guild situation. The first of these being Cap of Scarlet Savant, which you can swap for a plus 41 shadow damage helmet if you want to. The next is the neck piece off of Ragnaros, which is Choker of the Fire Lord. This is going to be your best in slot necklace all the way up until AQ40 Twin Emperors. The next two items, Master's Mantle and Master's Cloak, are the exact same as last time, just a max rolled of Shadow Wrath gear. The robe, however, does change. This robe is actually very, very good. This is Robe of Volatile Power and can drop off of several bosses in Molten Core, meaning you can get more than one of these per raid if you're lucky with loot. Next are the bracers, which of course are just of Shadow Wrath bracers plus 21 shadow damage bracers. That's the best that you can get at the time. And of course we have the Gloves of Spell Mastery. Again, these can be swapped for Hands of Power if you're in that sort of guild, or if you're in a slow fight such as Ragnaros, a fight that lasts a long period of time, and so on. Now we're going to look at Mana Igniting Cord, which is a fantastic belt. Actually, this belt has almost the exact same stats as the Warlock's Tier 2 belt. The only difference is 8 intellect, so they're virtually the same. But regardless, this item is fantastic. This, or the Tier 2 belt from Nemesis set, is going to last you all the way till you've downed Cthulhu and gotten Eye Stalker Waist Cord, which is the only other upgrade. You can get a Tier 3 belt as well from Naxxramas, but the Eye Stalker Waist Cord off of Cthulhu is the best belt in the game. And you can use this belt or the T2 belt all the way until then. Next is going to be your Tier 2 legs that you can get off of Ragnaros. These legs are fantastic. Not only do they give a huge amount of spell power and stamina and intellect, but they give you fire resistance, which can actually help you out in many different fights between Molten Core and Blackwing Lair. Again, we have the Master's Boots. You just want plus 30 shadow damage for these boots. We have Ring of Spell Power, which is actually a non-unique ring that drops in Molten Core. They're fairly rare, so it's unlikely that you're going to get two just for yourself, but these are going to be the best rings that you can get during Phase 1. Let's skip over to the trinkets, and the only trinket that really swaps here is Talisman of Imperial Power comes into the game. Now, Talisman of Imperial Power, let's talk about on-use trinkets in general. On-use trinkets gain more value the shorter the fight is. Let me explain. So this second has an uptime of 15 seconds. That means if you're on a fight where the boss, like Lucifron, a very fast boss to kill, let's say you kill him in 20 seconds, for example. That means that the uptime of this trinket is 75% of the boss fight, making it extremely valuable. However, if you're fighting a boss such as Ragnaros, Ragnaros can stay alive, depending on how fast your guild is, for several minutes, meaning the uptime of this item is not nearly as high percentage-wise, lowering it in value a little bit. Also, while you have an on-use trinket activated, it increases the rating of your hit rating values and your crit rating values. So that's another thing to take into consideration, but that's something for another video. The only other item that has changed is Azure Song Mage Blade. And this item isn't necessarily for burst damage or sustain damage, it's just simply the best in slot weapon. There's also another weapon that you can get called Staff of Dominance. However, it's better to go main hand offhand, seeing as Staff of Dominance has similar stats to Mage Blade, but is a two-handed weapon. So the Mage Blade plus the offhand will end up giving you better stats. That's it for this video, guys, but I'm gonna be doing a video similar to this for every single phase of content. So as soon as another phase of content is going to be on the way, you can expect for another one of these videos to be coming out. Also, one last thing I want to mention, and I've mentioned this in the past few videos, so I don't want to shill too much, I don't want to push this on you guys too much, but right now for my Patreons, I'm offering a full spreadsheet that will tell people how to invest their gold, particularly in Phase 1, to get extremely rich to the point where by the time Blackwing Lair or Zul'Gurub comes out, you'll never even have to farm gold for the rest of the game, and you'll be able to use flasks every single raid. It's my personal spreadsheet that I have used in the past to get really, really rich so I can just sit back, never have to farm gold ever again. I'm gonna be allowing people to purchase this spreadsheet through my Patreon for the next 3 days up until Classic comes out. So one day after Classic comes out, I'm going to be taking this offer away. So once again, if you are interested in something like this, let me know. You can head on over to my Patreon in the link down below. But if you're not interested in this, go ahead and just ignore it. No big deal. This is going to be the last video that I mention it. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.